So I want us to start your story proper with the music you were forced to listen to, not the music that you chose to listen to. Not to say forced in a bad way, but it really
Right.
was the start of your journey.
Well, for me, I came up around the time hip hop first started. So, you know, like my mother's from Inglewood, New Jersey. So if give you a bit of hip hop history, that's where the
Love it.
Sugar Hill Gang is from. So my mother actually grew up with the first people that had the very first commercial hip hop record. So for me, um, like you said, you have this music that your parents listen to around the house when there's chores and they're doing stuff and they're relaxing, which quite naturally in that time was like the Anita Bakers, the Patti LaBelle's, the New Editions. But my mother used to like when she would hear records that I would listen to, specifically this record. De La Soul used to have a record called Me, Myself, and I, and it was a sample of Parliament Funkadelics, Not Just Knee Deep. So I had that component in my household where, it wasn't, you get this thing where it's like, with the old heads, when they're listening to something and they hear the kids listening to it, so, you don't know nothing about that. That's my generation. Whereas my mother just specifically told me, well, that record that you're listening to is a Parliament and Funkadelic record that I actually have the record. Like I grew up listening to records, you know what I mean? I'm kind of dating myself with that, but actual records, like Parliament and Funkadelic, um, Barry White, all the James Brown, all of the beginning of hip hop, like the records that were being sampled, that's what I was listening to in my household, and
Yeah.
and and I was educated. I was educated on that, like like hip hop when I was a child, it was very sample heavy.
So let me
Everything
just
was
ask you, let's expand on that a little bit because I think with your dating yourself, it gives us an opportunity to discuss something like actually what music consumption was like when you were young, right?
right.
And I say this because I was talking to this young 20-year-old guy about his life, and he's like, YouTube was the thing my whole life. So it was just
Yeah,
his whole music exposure. So just because it could be anybody listening, walk us through
right.
what it's like to actually deal with records, you know? Like, what was it like in terms of
Well,
just being
well,
in that environment?
well. First of all, well, you had to be real delicate because you might break something, whether it was the needle, the belt, and I actually wound up DJing, so I understood the difference between like belt driven turntables, direct driven turntables, which is the Technique 1200s, which was like coveted.
So
Everything is
what's the
Serato
difference
now, but
between that? Let's just assume I don't know what that means, and you
okay,
could.
so a belt driven, if you lift up the turntable, is actually a belt. So just think like it's like a machine. So it's like knobs, and you put the belt around the knobs, and that's what's turning the record. But a direct drive is it's almost like a motor. So it's running. It's just running a little more efficiently because it's like a machine.
Okay.
Um, and the Technique 1200s, or like a coveted, like that was like if like you started out with a belt driven like Gemini's or Panasonic turntables, and then you got to the Technique 1200s. That was like that was what the DJs had. That's what Premier had. That's what Scratch had. Anytime you seen like a DJ competition, they had the 1200s. Um, which you probably didn't have 1200 if you weren't an actual DJ.
Right.
So
Right.
you had, like I said, you had to be delicate with this turntable because there were so many components to it that if you broke it, like you ruined everything. You know what I mean?
So,
Like
so in a sense, basically, the 1200s are just kind of bigger machines that, or maybe not
the
bigger, but
12,
they were
I
able to
mean,
handle shit better.
physically it's the same size, but it's a little heavier because it's
Okay.
actual machinery inside of it. And like I said, usually a 1200 is only being used by a real state of the art DJ. I mean, if you had a couple dollars, you could get your hands on some 1200s, but mostly like if you went to somebody's house, they had a belt driven turn. I mean, this was what my parents listened to. I kind of came into the era where it was like tapes and CDs. But first it was 8 tracks, records, tape, CDs, and I came on the cusp of that transition from the records. So I grew up in
Mm.
a house where there were records. There were tons of records. So like I said, when my mother heard me listening to what was, the beginning of rap, which was very sample heavy, whether it was a James Brown sample, a Barry White sample, she would tell me, I have the actual record that's sampled from. She'd say, go pick it out and we put it on a turntable. And that's kind of what started my love for music, actually.
Yo, that's fresh. I just wanted to shout out Pre-Chankobia, who's in the chats and says he grew up using 1200s. They weren't cheap. Pro DJs only, heavy as fuck. So just so you know, your words are resonating with people. And big ups and thank you so much for sharing these knowledge nuggets with us. That's how we all learn. That's how we all grow. But what I really learned is that you actually had a machine that was literally required a level of delicacy, whereas most of us grew up in some shit with Gorilla Glass where you can throw it on the floor and it's all good.
Right. Yeah, not with them turntables. You messed them turntables up. That was ass whooping. Yeah, you was going to get beaten. So actually, my mother tells me that she used to have to put. I guess because I just was. This music shit is in me. It's not something that I do. It's part of my DNA. Right. So she said that she used to have to cover the record player because I would climb up on top of it as a baby. You're talking like I'm 2 years old. Climbing up, and because I would see her playing the music, so I would go and try to cut it on, but I didn't know what I was doing, and I was gonna break something. So she would have to cover it. I would climb. She actually has a picture of me like climbing on top of the radio. It's pretty dope. You know what I mean?
No, that is dope, man. Because I ask a lot of people about the start of it, right? And to know that for you, because you're a talented guy, right? I've listened to a fuck ton of your 1 minutes. I've listened to that track you have as your trailer. I've listened to a bunch of your freestyles. We've listened to your battles. You are talented at literally everything you do. And I believe in the idea that like 10,000 hours plus to perfection, right? So the fact is that you started so fucking young, and that's it just shows in the finesse and the excellence. But what's also, first of all, big ups to being a Robert Greene fan. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Robert Greene, and to see you shout out his books is fucking fire. We can get to that a bit later on, but I just want y'all to know that this man has a sense of mastery. And you can see it even starting as a baby desiring the music. And that is fucking incredible, dude. That is something you should brag about for how cool it is.
Well, you got to be humble a little bit.
That's fair. But still, so you're surrounded by a lot of the classics. But what's super interesting is you have access to all these vinyls and records at your home, and you're able to get at any point into the DJ. But what's even more interesting is your musical journey really starts with the stuff that created hip hop in terms of what was sampled. So you knew the source material right off the jump, and this was just part of your upbringing. So you said music was in you the whole time. When did you really get into it in some way? Was this like as a kid, you're already involved? Are you dancing? Like, are you doing all sorts of stuff?
Like I said, well, my dad is from New York and my mother's from New Jersey. So when you have that setup, you're like just quite naturally back and forth across the bridge, the George Washington Bridge, for those of y'all that don't know. And I was just exposed to early elements, the DJs, the breakdancing, the MCs. And as a kid, you're just a sponge. So everything is influential, whether it's the sports, the people in your neighborhood, the music, but the music is what I gravitated to the most. So, I just, from young, I'm talking about, because I don't want to get too, I know how these go. You got to pace yourself. So if we talking young, I'm coming home from elementary school. I do your homework so you can watch your own TV raps and Video Music Box.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you know what Video Music Box is.
I don't, but I do know what Yo MTV Raps is. But I think for the whole world, we need to know what Video Music Box is. And for these moments, I want you to just bridge that gap and share those knowledge nuggets.
All right, so Video Music Box in New York, tri-state area, they used to have a show on cable access. It was hosted by Ralph McDaniels, and it was just basically, it was essentially like Yo MTV Raps, but it was on cable access. So we had Ralph McDaniels. He would be he's hosting it, and he'll play a video, and then he might be in a club, like whatever club was popping in New York at the time, or like at a record release party for whoever, for Chubb Rock, for Nice and
Okay.
Smooth, for like I'm talking about like that far back. It was actually a Houdini record that was the intro. Rest in peace to a homie that just died from Houdini, but it was like dun, 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 dun. I forgot the name of the record, but that was how it used to come on. And Ralph McDaniels, since he was a New York show, like it catered to New York rap, which at that time was like the pinnacle of hip hop. And I just remember I was just fascinated by specifically Big Daddy Kane.
Okay.
Because it was just like I just felt like you could hear how intelligent he was through his lyrics. And I was just like, yo, like he's saying something, he's being clever about it, he's being witty about it. And for those of y'all that don't know, like Big Daddy Kane was Jay-Z's mentor. So
okay.
that wittiness,
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that like when Big Daddy Kane was like at the height of his career, like he used to bring Jay-Z out in the middle of his show and let him kick a freestyle. So the wittiness that you hear in Big Daddy, the wittiness that you hear in Jay-Z, he got a lot of it from Kane. And I'm just fascinated by how smooth and charismatic this guy was. And it's like he's making this shit rhyme, and he's on beat. Like I'm saying, like I'm like 6-7 years old, and I'm fascinated by this. Like I'm not even thinking about becoming a rapper at this time because it's so far-fetched and in terms of like the skill set, and I don't even know how to go about doing it at this point. You know, like I just know that I'm fascinated by how charismatic and talented this guy is, and like the girls liked him. You know, like I said, I come from that.
Big facts.
Yeah, you
I
know,
don't
like
think people know he did that photo shoot with Madonna and all that stuff also.
Right, like and so now you got to understand, like this is the 80s, so we're still like in terms of like black and white, like you don't even see that shit, like let alone the like I mean Madonna, like for lack of a better term, like she got around, but we didn't understand that as children. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like wow, like this girl is the top of pop culture at this point, and she's doing a shoot with Big Daddy Kane. Like that's crazy. But that just goes to show you that's where rap can take you.